What is up, guys? I hope everyone had a great New Year's and great holidays, but the Blue Bloods are back as we had one of our first semifinal games on New Year's Eve as the Alabama Crimson Tide picked up a huge win, 27-6 over the Cincinnati Bearcats in Dallas in the Cotton Bowl this season. And man, it was a dominant performance by Alabama. Yes, maybe the offensive output wasn't exactly what we thought it would be from Bryce Young, only putting up 181 total passing yards, but they absolutely played dominant defensive football. They held Cincinnati to less than 220 total yards this weekend, only 2 for 12 on third downs, and held them under 15 first downs for one of the most explosive group of five offenses with a dominant quarterback in Desmond Ritter and a transfer running back in Jerome Ford, who has been having an outstanding season. So it was a performance that I know some people were expecting, but overall, man, Bama gets another dominant win, and Nick Saban adds to the already impressive legacy that he's left for his not only his career, but in Tuscaloosa at Alabama. And some takeaways from the win. What went into Alabama achieving their goal of making it to another national championship? So it has to start with really and truly the MVP of this game, Brian Robinson Jr., 26 carries for over 200 rushing yards. And it was clear early on. Alabama knew that they respected the secondary of Cincinnati. They respected Sauce Gardner, respected Kobe Bryant, Brian Cook, all those guys in the back end, but they knew they had a distinct advantage at the line of scrimmage. That offensive line, that first drive where they ran the ball, I believe damn near every single play and just wore Cincinnati down and ultimately went up 7-0 early on in that game. I think a lot of people saw where the difference was between Cincinnati and Alabama, and it was in the line of scrimmage. It was in the physicality up front. And Alabama imposed their will early on. And for Brian Robinson, this was really a huge redemption story for him, not in terms of an injury comeback or anything like that, but all year long, including myself, has said the rushing game is the weakness. Put the ball in Bryce Young's hand. The running game wasn't there against Auburn. The rushing game wasn't there against LSU, wasn't there at times against Florida. And everyone was just saying, let Bryce Young do his thing. Well, Nick Saban in Alabama said, we know we have the advantage. We know we're going to be able to run the football. And they did just that this weekend in Jerry World, and Cincinnati had no answer for it. And then on top of that, you have to give the defense some credit, man. They were all over the field. Will Anderson, 2 sacks again, was unblockable off the edge. And then the secondary with Branch and Battle and McKinstry stepping up, they played a huge part in what happened this weekend. They kept Desmond Ritter off balance. They kept him uncomfortable in the pocket. I would say they did exactly what they had to do to stop the Cincinnati offense, and I want to give the secondary a huge credit, a lot of credit for Alabama, especially missing Josh Jobe. They lose, one of their backups already early in the game to look like some cramps or something. They had a JUCO player who came in for his first year out there balling for them. And you have to give Alabama a lot of credit for that next man up mentality. And it's something that we've seen time and time again under Nick Saban. He has his players ready to play at any given moment. And I thought this weekend was the biggest example of that. Yes, all season long, it's been Jamison Williams, it's been John Mechie, it's been Bryce Young, it's been Will Anderson. Well, in this game, it was some names that really stepped up in some big ways, including Robinson at the running back spot. And I want to give a big shout out Brooks. This kid at wide receiver, he made the game tying catch against Auburn when he had to step in for Jamison Williams being ejected for targeting. But Ja'Cory Brooks, 4 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown, was the leading receiver in terms of yardage for Alabama. He had a giant game, and it just shows exactly how deep Alabama is at the wide receiver spot. So Ja'Cory Brooks deserves a lot of credit if you're a Bama fan, if you're an analyst, because every time his name's called, even though Mechie and Williams got a lot of the shine, Ja'Cory Brooks answered the call every single time Nick Saban needed him to step up. And that speaks a lot on what Ja'Cory Brooks and that wide receiving core can do for Alabama. And then Trey Sanders also had a solid game, 67 yards rushing. This Bama team rushed for 300 yards on 47 carries. They imposed their will. They knew they were more physical, and it just showed that the Cincinnati just didn't have the defensive depth to hang with Alabama. Now, Young did have a bad interception early in the game, but Bryce Young, 17 for 28, 181, and 3 touchdowns, still did his thing. The pass right before halftime to put them up, it was the pass to Brooks down the field, 44-yard touchdown pass was a dime where Brooks absolutely burnt Kobe Bryant, that one of the top Cincinnati corners on that team, and that was a beautiful pass. And Young was getting pressured all night long and just kept staying in the pocket, keeping his pocket presence, and just being the guy he needed to be for Alabama. So even though his stat box might not be one of the more impressive ones of the season, I still think Bryce Young did enough to get at least some accolades in this game. And for Alabama to move on to face Georgia again, they have to be feeling confident. Because as much as you can say it's tough to beat a team twice, you're giving Nick Saban and one of the most talented coaching staffs in the country another shot to pick apart what Georgia corrected in their game against Michigan. That recap coming later today. So for me, Alabama has to be feeling confident. It might not have been, one of those dominant all-time 42 to nothing performances some people thought we were going to see. They did enough to win. They came in, had a game plan, stuck to it, and executed at the highest level. So give Alabama their props this weekend. Now, for Cincinnati, what went wrong for them? It was just you could tell immediately the depth and the physicality and the size in their front in the defensive and offensive lines just was not there. They just didn't have the ability to hold off that offensive line for long. They were too big, too strong, and too physical for Cincinnati, and that was evident from the first 3 or 4 snaps. And on top of that, running that 3-3-5 look that they do so well, they had to bring someone down and run like a four-man front or something because 3 versus 5 up front was not working for them. It was allowing Bama to get to the second level of the defense, and they were able to execute at such a high level, and it really caused Cincinnati's defense some problems. Now, I thought their secondary did an excellent job at keeping Young from winning the game himself, but it was clear that the run defense really was the Achilles heel for Cincinnati this weekend. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, I thought they did some nice stuff at times. Jerome Ford's 77 yards rushing was fine, but they didn't have any depth at the running back spot. Desmond Ritter, 17 for 32, 144 yards. I thought he could have played better. There was times where the inaccuracy really showed for Desmond Ritter, something that he was being picked apart on in previous seasons. But the offensive line did him no favors. He was getting pressured all night long, and you could tell that internal clock started to speed up for him, and he really never felt comfortable in the pocket. And I think it really got Desmond Ritter out of his game early. And there were just some missed opportunities. When you drive down against Alabama, field goals aren't going to win you the game. You have to get touchdowns, and they weren't able to execute when it really mattered. That first drive when it was 7-3, or it ended up being 7-3. They got a penalty that pushed them back, a big sack. They needed to score a touchdown there. If it's 7-7 there, I think the momentum is completely different. And lack of execution when they got into Bama territory is really something that I think is a story of this game because you turn those field goals into touchdowns. 27-14 looks a lot different than 27-6. I thought Cincinnati really hung in there, well enough to impress some people who were doubting. But for me, I thought that lack of execution when they really needed it really cost them this game. And the wide receivers did no favors for Cincinnati either. Young, Scott had big games, 8 combined catches for almost 100 yards. But Wild and Pierce at the tight end spot didn't do enough. Ford coming out of the backfield did not do enough. They were not dynamic enough with their play calling, in my opinion, through the air to really take advantage of a secondary that has some young and new pieces in it. They really needed to put pressure on those young guys who have not seen a lot of action, and I just don't think they were able to do it. Controlling Will Anderson was a problem. You cannot allow him to establish himself like he did this weekend. And I know that's easier said than done. Probably the best edge rusher in college football. but you cannot allow him to impact the game like he did. And I just didn't think the run game was as consistent enough as it needed to be. I told you guys on the preview, if Jerome Ford did not rush for 100 yards, Cincinnati probably was not going to win this game. He did not get to 100 yards. And I think that really and truly cost them the game. They only had 74 yards rushing total, and they needed to run for 100 to 150. And your defense was just on the field too long because they were not able to establish drives consistently. I thought the defensive game plan was fine for the most part. They gave their offense as many chances as they needed. But as we hear the narrative over and over again, the depth just was not there toward the end of the game, and you have to you got to give Luke Fickell and Cincinnati credit for getting here. I don't I For me, we'll move down to the third point here. Did Cincinnati prove that the group of five belongs in the college football playoff? As much as 27-6, some people would say no. I think if you watch the game, it's a resounding yes. I thought they competed against Bama as well as a Notre Dame did and Oklahoma did a few years ago. A Clemson did with Kelly Bryant in years past. Washington did when they played Alabama in the Peach Bowl back in 2016. I didn't think that Cincinnati looked completely overmatched. I thought at the athlete spot, at the cornerback and a wide receiver on the edge, the quarterback, running back, I thought they could match up to Bama fairly well, but it was in the trenches. The depth just was not there. And that's a narrative that we've seen against Notre Dame and some of these other teams, is that in Oklahoma, especially in the Big 12, that the depth at the line of scrimmage and the physicality wasn't there. So for me, I still don't want to hear the narrative that Cincinnati didn't belong. I don't think there was a team behind them in the rankings that you could say would give Alabama a better run for their money. So I think ultimately this was a great moment for the group of five in Cincinnati to get in and kind of use this measuring stick to see where they are. And I think ultimately there were a lot of missed opportunities, but Bama at the end of the day was a better team, like I think a lot of us said. And I had Bama winning this game. I believe it was 35-27. So I got at least one part of it. I said the 27, even though I gave it to Cincinnati, but the Bama defense played huge, and Alabama gets out with a big win. But lastly, before we move on, man, we know what's next for Alabama. Headed to Indianapolis and Lucas Oil Stadium to face the Georgia Bulldogs. Recap coming shortly after this, but breaking down this Nick Saban dynasty, man, I've heard this narrative repeatedly, said by other people that, man, Nick Saban is not the coach you guys think he is. All he is, he just got the best players. Well, he deserves so much credit for building the dynasty he has. He did it at LSU, winning a national championship in Baton Rouge. And on top of this, coming into Alabama, losing to Louisiana Monroe his first year and turning it immediately around in his second year and going to the national championship. And he's done it in a multitude of ways. He's won national championships with stifling defenses, allowing less than 7 points a game. He's won national championships like last year with the most explosive offense in the country. He's had 4 Heisman winners as the coach of Alabama: Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, Bryce Young, Devontae Smith. 3 different positions out of 4 Heisman winners. And we've seen this evolution of Nick Saban. And that's something I don't think gets talked about enough, is how he's evolved to the game of football. Back in the day, you could have a defense that, allowed less than 10 points a game, and your offense could average 20 and be middle of the road, and you can win a national championship with a game managing quarterback. Nick Saban saw that change, brought in a Lane Kiffin, brought in a Billy Napier at the wide receiving coach, brought in a bunch of guys who can put this high flying offense on the field. And then you see him evolve, winning national championships with the Tua Tagovailoa, with the stable of wide receivers that he had, with a Najee Harris, where they're averaging damn near 50 points a game. I don't think people give Saban enough credit for how amazing of a coach he is. And I know people see the Auburn stuff in the background, but I don't think there's any question anymore, and there shouldn't have been 2 years ago, but definitely now, that Nick Saban has solidified himself as the greatest college football coach of all time. And there's not even somebody who belongs in the discussion with him anymore. And is getting to the point where you have to put him in just the greatest coach, regardless of sport discussion, because of the dominance and because of the sustained success he has, where he's still recruiting kids at the highest level. He's developing them, because you can say, oh, he has all the 5 stars in the world. Guess what? Florida was landing 5 stars. Guess what? Georgia's landing 5 stars. They haven't won a national title. LSU was landing 5 stars, and you can Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Oregon, USC, all these teams were landing 5 stars, but they weren't developing them to the point that they were always successful. Nick Saban has one of the highest blue chip hit rates in the country, according to 247 Sports, where all these recruits he's landing turn into superstars, and that's not a coincidence. And so I think people have to put a bit more respect on Nick Saban's name, in my opinion, and that's where I'm going to leave it right now. But Alabama defeats Cincinnati 27-6 in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic this year. College football playoff semifinal. They head on to face Georgia, number 3 seed in the college football playoffs in Indianapolis and Lucas Oil Stadium for the national championship, a huge SEC championship rematch. Preview of that game coming later this week, so make sure to tune into that. If you're new, smash that subscribe button, hit the like button on this video, and comment your takeaways of this game. It was a great weekend of college football, guys. Listen, we took a little bit of a break, had to move across the country. As y'all see, a new setup in the background. Studio coming soon, working on that. So big things in the work here on the Blue Bloods. So make sure to stay tuned for all the new content coming this week. We have a packed week with multiple interviews, game previews, FCS content, FBS content. So make sure to subscribe now. But until next time, guys, the Blue Bloods are out.